Unit 42.
Conversation. (113). He was climbing the stairs. The lifts weren't working. He was climbing the stairs. The lifts weren't working. 114. She was eating lunch at her desk. She was working very hard. She was eating lunch at her desk. She was working very hard. 115. He was wearing boots. It was snowing. He was wearing boots. It was snowing. 116. They were making carbon copies of the letters. The Xerox wasn't working. They were making carbon copies of the letters. The Xerox wasn't working.
117. Was he climbing the stairs?
Yes, he was.
Were the lifts working?
No, they weren't.
118. Was she eating lunch at her desk?
Yes, she was.
Was she working very hard?
Yes, she was.
119. Was he wearing boots?
Yes, he was.
Was it snowing?
Yes, it was.
120. Were they making carbon copies of the letters?
Yes, they were.
Was the Xerox working?
No, it wasn't.
121. Was he climbing the stairs?
122. Yes, he was.
123. Were the lifts working?
124. No, they weren't.
125. Was she eating lunch at her desk?
126. Yes, she was.
127. Was she working very hard?
128. Yes, she was.
129. Was he wearing boots?
130. Yes, he was.
131. Was it snowing?
132. Yes, it was.
133. Were they making carbon copies of the letters?
134. Yes, they were.
135. Was the Xerox working?
136. No, it wasn't.
137. Why was he climbing the stairs?
Because the lifts weren't working.
138. Why was she eating lunch at her desk?
Because she was working very hard.
139. Why was he wearing boots?
Because it was snowing.
140. Why were they making carbon copies of the letters?
Because the Xerox wasn't working.
141. Why was he climbing the stairs?
142. Because the lifts weren't working.
143. Why was she eating lunch at her desk?
144. Because she was working very hard.
145. Why was he wearing boots?
146. Because it was snowing.
147. Why were they making carbon copies of the letters?
148. Because the Xerox wasn't working.
149. He couldn't find her in the Xerox room. He couldn't find her in the Xerox room. 150. He couldn't go down to the coffee shop just then. He couldn't go down to the coffee shop just then. 151. She couldn't read his handwriting. She couldn't read his handwriting. 152. They couldn't take him to the factory that day. They couldn't take him to the factory that day.
153. Could he find her in the Xerox room?
No, he couldn't.
154. Could he go down to the coffee shop just then?
No, he couldn't.
155. Could she read his handwriting?
No, she couldn't.
156. Could they take him to the factory that day?
No, they couldn't.
157. Could he find her in the Xerox room?
158. No, he couldn't.
159. Could he go down to the coffee shop just then?
160. No, he couldn't.
161. Could she read his handwriting?
162. No, she couldn't.
163. Could they take him to the factory that day?
164. No, they couldn't.
165. He couldn't go to Paris on Thursday. He could go on Friday. He couldn't go to Paris on Thursday. He could go on Friday. 166. He couldn't get a seat on the 9 o'clock flight. He could get a seat on the 8 o'clock flight. He couldn't get a seat on the 9 o'clock flight. He could get a seat on the 8 o'clock flight. 167. She couldn't take shorthand. She could type. She couldn't take shorthand. She could type. 168. They couldn't take him to the factory on Monday. They could take him on Tuesday. They couldn't take him to the factory on Monday. They could take him on Tuesday.
169. Could he go to Paris on Thursday?
No, he couldn't.
Could he go on Friday?
Yes, he could.
170. Could he get a seat on the 9 o'clock flight?
No, he couldn't.
Could he get a seat on the 8 o'clock flight?
Yes, he could.
171. Could she take shorthand?
No, she couldn't.
Could she type?
Yes, she could.
172. Could they take him to the factory on Monday?
No, they couldn't.
Could they take him on Tuesday?
Yes, they could.
173. Could he go to Paris on Thursday?
174. No, he couldn't.
175. Could he go on Friday?
176. Yes, he could.
177. Could he get a seat on the 9 o'clock flight?
178. No, he couldn't.
179. Could he get a seat on the 8 o'clock flight?
180. Yes, he could.
181. Could she take shorthand?
182. No, she couldn't.
183. Could she type?
184. Yes, she could.
185. Could they take him to the factory on Monday?
186. No, they couldn't.
187. Could they take him on Tuesday?
188. Yes, they could.
189. Some businessmen in Hamburg wrote several letters to Mr. Baker. 190. He visited them after a few weeks. 191. They showed their offices to him. 192. They showed their equipment to him. 193. They manufacture electronic equipment. 194. They showed their new plant to him. 195. They gave samples of their equipment to him. 196. When he got back, he sent a copy of his report to them.
197. Who wrote several letters to Mr. Baker?
Some businessmen in Hamburg wrote several letters to him.
198. Did he visit them after a few weeks?
Yes, he did.
199. What did they show to him?
They showed their offices to him.
200. What else did they show to him?
They showed their equipment to him.
201. What do they manufacture?
They manufacture electronic equipment.
202. What else did they show to him?
They showed their new plant to him.
203. What did they give to him?
They gave samples of their equipment to him.
204. What did he send to them when he got back?
He sent a copy of his report to them.
205. Who wrote several letters to Mr. Baker?
206. Some businessmen in Hamburg wrote several letters to him.
207. Did he visit them after a few weeks?
208. Yes, he did.
209. What did they show to him?
210. They showed their offices to him.
211. What else did they show to him?
212. They showed their equipment to him.
213. What do they manufacture?
214. They manufacture electronic equipment.
215. What else did they show to him?
216. They showed their new plant to him.
217. What did they give to him?
218. They gave samples of their equipment to him.
219. What did he send to them when he got back?
220. He sent a copy of his report to them.
221. They showed him their new plant. They showed their new plant to him. They showed it to him. They showed him their new plant. They showed their new plant to him. They showed it to him. 222. They gave him samples of their equipment. They gave samples of their equipment to him. They gave them to him. They gave him samples of their equipment. They gave samples of their equipment to him. They gave them to him.
223. I sent her a package. I sent a package to her. I sent it to her. I sent her a package. I sent a package to her. I sent it to her. 224. She wrote me a letter. She wrote a letter to me. She wrote it to me. She wrote me a letter. She wrote a letter to me. She wrote it to me.
225. What did they show him?
They showed him their new plant.
226. When did they show it to him?
They showed it to him on Monday.
227. What did you send her?
I sent her a package.
228. When did you send it to her?
I sent it to her last week.
229. What did they send him?
They sent him some samples of their equipment.
230. When did they send them to him?
They sent them to him last month.
Conversation test.
1. What did they show him? 2. When did they show it to him? 3. What did you send her? 4. When did you send it to her? 5. What did they send him? 6. When did they send them to him?